It's my great pleasure to introduce you to my long-term colleague and friend, Brett Walker. Brett, as the slide indicates, is currently at the Reischauer Institute at Harvard University. He is a Regents Professor of the entire Montana State University system, as well as Michael Malone Memorial Professor of History at Montana State University. Rather than focus more and more tightly on elements of Japanese society and elements of Japanese history, Professor Walker's intellectual trajectory has increasingly linked Japan to broader concerns in thematic and comparative ways that show people throughout the world the value of understanding what's going on in Japan, for reflecting on our understanding of issues of pollution and many, many other issues. Embodied in this kind of trajectory are, in many ways, efforts of what Brad Richardson did through his publications and through his teaching. He was a political scientist. He used his understanding of Japan and his access to Japanese language materials to show both how both could be used to refine our understandings of the political world and to make Japan and its experience relative to vistas beyond those of traditional Japanologists. Professor Walker's efforts through the study of science, the environment, and global comparative history embrace the same mission that guided the career of Brad Richardson and makes him an ideal inaugural lecturer for this series. Please join me in welcoming Professor Walker.
So in the 20th century, no material, with the possible exceptions of steel and concrete, proved as foundational to modern built environments as asbestos. And if you're looking at these pictures of tile and horror, because you've seen them in your classrooms, you're absolutely right. Engineers celebrated it as a miracle fiber because of its heat-resisting and insulating qualities. It served as fibrous internal reinforcement for cement water pipes, as well as insulation for boilers and heating ducts. Fabricators fashioned it into electrolytic membranes for creating ammonium sulfide in fertilizers, and it lined automobile brakes and formed high-pressure gaskets in high-performance naval engines. It added fire resistance to roofing tiles and adhered to the steel frames of multi-story buildings as critical fireproofing. It served as a ubiquitous part of the 20th century world, and for this reason, it is everywhere. If your house was built in the first 2/3 of the 20th century, you probably live with it and don't even know it. In the 1960s and 1970s, however, physicians such as Irving Selikoff of Mount Sinai began linking asbestos to pulmonary health problems such as asbestosis and serious lung cancers such as mesothelioma. And as you know, if you're watching cable television, for example, tuning into the periodic Republican debate, you've seen the ubiquitous commercials for mesothelioma recently. It still continues to be a very big litigation industry. As a result, most major industrial democracies incrementally banned asbestos use in the early 1980s, largely because of persistent cases of occupational exposure. Japan's use of all varieties of asbestos persisted longer than most other industrial democracies. But the Kubota shock episode of June 2005 proved a game changer. In this tragedy, Kubota Corporation acknowledged that 128 former employees and over 100 nearby residents had died from asbestos-related diseases, including mesothelioma, from asbestos released at its Kanzaki factory. The episode galvanized public opinion against the fibrous mineral. In February of 2006, Japan's government responded by passing the Asbestos Health Damage Relief Act, which covered the health-related costs of all workers exposed to asbestos. That same year, 30 years after the US, Japan's government banned all forms of asbestos. Because of such commercial bans and public health policies in Japan and elsewhere, many people assume the story of asbestos exposure is over, resolved after government agencies forbid the popular building material. In fact, the story of asbestos exposure is just beginning, because the world we made with it, from our public schools and factories to our blow dryers and fake snow, is starting to collapse and age, or is being destroyed by war and natural disasters. Today, this dark fibrous genie is being let out of its 20th century bottle and will prove difficult and extremely expensive to lure back in. One of the most lasting legacies of the 9/11 terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers, for example, is the enduring health crisis caused by World Trade Center dust, which has sickened and killed first responders at alarming rates. Another dramatic example of the destruction of the built environment releasing dangerous levels of asbestos was Japan's 3/11 triple disaster in 2011, when a massive offshore earthquake and tsunami devastated northeastern Honshu. Because Japan used asbestos in building materials until as late as 2005, much of the debris contained levels of asbestos. When Japanese first responders and workers, as well as volunteers from around the world, including students of my own, began cleaning up the millions of tons of debris, they were exposed to the dangerous fire. Suffice it to say that all these geologic and seismic factors contributed to the natural capacity of the Great Eastern Japan earthquake to kill, damage property, and disrupt lives. Now, other than traces of sea level increases, which exacerbated the effects of the waves, right, the earthquake and tsunami originated beyond the hands of humans. They were actually naturally occurring. But once the waves of shaking earth and the wall of water reached the eastern shore of Japan, the natural disaster immediately transformed into a human-made one, destroying or washing away economic development schemes, class divisions, seawalls, retail stores, public schools, subsidized fishing ports, greenhouses, and other material relics of Japanese policies and Japanese decision-making. The destruction caused by the earthquake and tsunami also released a half-century's worth of asbestos that was embedded in northeastern Japan's built environment, posing at least as significant a public health threat as radiation does. Subsequent testing has found a host of asbestos minerals. The earthquake was certainly unforeseeable, that is, unforeseeable insofar as any earthquake in Japan is unforeseeable. But the destroyed buildings and piles of debris would release a decade's worth of asbestos that was anything but unforeseeable. Because Japan terminated the use of asbestos in 2005, asbestos is no longer out in the open, a blatant occupational hazard sickening factory workers or miners, as it did in Osaka or nearby Kanzaki. Now asbestos is deeply embedded in building materials, part of the composite stratigraphy of a past industrial age. For this reason, the place of asbestos in Japan's built environment becomes most clear when that environment is destroyed, pulverized, aerosolized, and then inhaled. It is after major disasters that asbestos can be monitored and measured, which gives some sense of the vast quantity of asbestos we continue to live with every day. With the possibility that tens of thousands of dangerous fibers were inhaled by first responders, volunteers, and relief workers each day, the future health threats of asbestos exposure after the Great Eastern Japan earthquake may even outweigh the future risks caused by radiation at the Fukushima Daiichi reactor. Like all asbestos exposure, only time will tell, which is where the historian's analysis, unfortunately, must end. So, thank you.